So remember when I said that I'll welcome you to the first video on what is going to be my brand new ideas, game for a dude about in a forest when the entire world has no plans. So my game didn't work out after all. What went wrong? Well, I started on the project about a year ago, excited to work on anything that wasn't my previous mini computer project. And if you've been around for a while, you probably already know this, but I started out making a basic voxel engine and then slowly but surely transforming it into a game about a robot that walks around, can transform the terrain, and can plant plants with some mystical undefined relationship between the robot and the plants. The game is also, for unexplained reasons, underground. And this was all fine, but I always had this nagging feeling that the game was missing something. I can't quite remember what it's called. Gameplay. It's missing gameplay. See, programming is my strong suit when it comes to game development. I like games, I play them plenty, but I am at best a mediocre game designer. That's just because I haven't done it that much. And well, after trying to cram some reasonable design in the game and trying to save things through some redesigns, which we'll talk about later, I just realized that things weren't going to work out with this project. So before we move on directly to my next project, which I am very excited to talk about, I thought it could be an insightful exercise to take a look at what I did wrong, so hopefully we can all learn something from my mistakes. So to get started, mistake number 1, I didn't prototype. Yeah, I know it seems obvious and really silly in hindsight, but I thought after I'd written down a few mechanics in a text file that maybe sounded fun, I could just get a custom engine up and running and try out the mechanics later. But this was a bad idea. What I should have done was prototype first, make a quick and dirty, hacky version of this robot idea, probably among other things, and basically just try to fail fast. It's always much easier to fail early and realize that something isn't fun or doesn't work out before actually putting time into it and writing code for something that doesn't work anyway as a game. The program in me wants to say it's almost like a compiler. You always want errors in your code reported earlier rather than later, and this goes for design too. Errors in design should be reported earlier in the design process. Fail fast. And speaking of things which should have been prototyped, we have our next mistake. I didn't have well-defined mechanics I was aiming for. Basically, I had a lot of different ideas and inspirations for my game, but not one single core, this is a game about planting plants idea, or something like that. I thought I did, but when I would actually sit down to think about the gameplay, all my thoughts were just fuzzy. I didn't have anything concrete. Some things felt good in my game, like planting little plants here and there, but it's not enough to make it into a complete, full-on game. And I realized from looking at other games that these core mechanics are basically what define and give a central gameplay idea which the rest of the game can build on. Jonathan Blow, the designer of Braid and The Witness, actually has a really good talk on this from a few years back, where to my understanding he talks about almost using the fun or interesting parts of the mechanics to design themselves for you. At least that's what I got out of the talk, but I highly recommend you check it out for yourself. Anyway, on to mistake number 3, which was I was putting the engine before the design. Don't get me wrong here, I don't regret or think it was a bad idea to roll my own engine, I just think I did it the wrong way. The code I write for the engine needs to serve the design, not the other way around. Again, to talk about Jonathan Blow, I was browsing YouTube the other day when this clip from one of his streams came up to me where he talks about entity systems. And, well, I'll just let the clip speak for itself.
Games can get complicated to make sometimes, right? There's a lot of challenges. It's a lot of work, and if you do some of it wrong, it becomes a disaster. But the way your entities are set up is not the hard part.
Basically, how I've interpreted this is that the engine design is not the interesting part of the game. The game is the interesting part of the game, and the engine design needs to serve that. This is fine for me if I was only focusing on an engine, but I was asking way too many questions about how to do things efficiently for a game that just didn't exist yet. I mean, just take a look at my last video. It's not all bad. The cool thing from this is that I ended up with a really fun, versatile engine that has been a blast to program. Without gameplay, it's pretty hollow. What I should have done was focused a little bit harder and kept things simple. Which brings me to my next mistake. I didn't keep it simple. Basically, how the whole design broke down for me was that I realized I couldn't concretely describe the game in one sentence, or even what I was going after. All anyone could ever get out of me when they asked what I was doing was robot, plant, pixel art, cave. Which might conjure up some cool images, but it doesn't really make for much of a game. What design I did have was too complicated, and I couldn't really focus on any one thing that would make the game fun when my ideas were so scattered across different systems. I thought the game should have crafting and exploration, and maybe the plants talk to you, and maybe there's some other robots in the game, and maybe there are some vines that you can grow in your caves, and maybe they act like a network for all the things that you can access, and maybe there's a system of like elemental essences that you use to develop the plants, and well, None of these ideas are bad in and of themselves, but the problem again was that there was no simple core idea or mechanic. This would of course have been solved again by prototyping. And a side note here in the area of simplicity while we're at it, my language choice C++ is also probably one of my biggest regrets. In addition to being the antithesis of simplicity, I should have picked a language that I already knew. Not that I haven't learned C++, I even wrote an entire reflection library for the language on the way, but if my priority is to make a game, learning C++ should come secondary to that. Also, the compile times are awful, and I kind of just miss C. Anyway, on to my final mistake. Focusing too much on graphics before gameplay. I'm not good at art. I'm getting better, but I'm not good, and that's fine. My game doesn't need art if it's a prototype or a proof of concept, but spending too much time on visuals before gameplay was really the final nail in the coffin for this project. The engine has a super cool raycasting lighting system, particle support, it can support like thousands of lights and a bunch of other fancy graphics things, SSAO, shadows, but I thought way too much about particle systems and lighting before I thought about anything related to gameplay. I focused on what graphical improvements I could do when I should have been dedicating that time to gameplay, making that solid, and then adding graphics that serve the higher purpose of the design, things that might enhance the experience for the player. I think the solution here is something that I did a little bit right, which is mockups and sketches so you can get an idea of what the game should look and feel like before you actually go on and program it. But in this case, I only ever really did mockups for the UI, and while they were enormously helpful, I should have had sketches for the rest of the game too. And well, with no gameplay and no real sketched out future, and no real way to solve it, I thought that was kind of it for the game. That's basically a list of the biggest things that I think went wrong with this project, and things that I maybe could have done differently to fix them. After realizing all this, I did try and go back and redesign my game, initially throwing the robot in the sky in a 3D version, then mocking up a 2D version where the plants could talk to you, also in the sky, adding a maybe cool dynamic background cloud shader, and I said, fuck this, it isn't gonna work, tried a 1-bit art style with a design that leaned more into the computer side of the robot, and well, luckily I didn't put a lot of time into any of these. Basically, for now, we're gonna put the robot game on the shelf. And that's okay, it's probably something that I should have done 6 months ago, but hey, live and learn. We'll be back someday though, little robot. In the meantime, I've started a new project, but I need just a little more time to get it ready to show off to everyone. And yeah, this time I actually wrote a design document and prototyped it first. Promise. And in other news, I've decided to launch a Patreon where you can continue to support my work and make sure that I'm able to stick around for a little while longer here on YouTube. If you support me there, you can download and take a look at all the source code for the Plant Robot game engine for yourself, all 30,000 lines of it. You'll also be getting some exclusive code walkthroughs, among other benefits to come soon. Also source code and hopefully releases to games that I'll be making in the future. The link is in the description if that sounds like something you'd be interested in. Otherwise, well, you can just keep watching me like you have been for the past couple of years. So anyway, as always, thank you for your continued support. Thanks for watching. Happy holidays, and check out my Patreon if that sounds like something you'd like. See you next time for something new.